Good morning to all of you who are with us on this very special day. We're honored to be able to share with you the main findings of this report, titled 6 Years of Implementation of the Final Agreement, Challenges and Opportunities in the New Political Cycle. My name is Josefina Chavarri Alvarez, and I'm the director of the Peace Accords Matrix at the Kroc Institute Keough School of Global Affairs at the University of Notre Dame. Joining me today for this webinar are three members of our team: Ángela María Ramírez Rincón, Executive Director of the Barometer Initiative; Brenda Forero, Report Editor for the Barometer Initiative; and Alison Kilholt, Associate Researcher at PAM. Good morning, Ángela, Brenda, and Alison.
Good morning, Josefina. It's a pleasure to be here.
Good morning.
Good morning, everyone.
The Kroc Institute for International Peace Studies is part of the Keough School of Global Affairs at the University of Notre Dame and is the leading center for peace studies, research, and practice. As part of the Kroc Institute, we at the Peace Accords Matrix have worked for over a decade in creating the most comprehensive database on the implementation of 34 peace agreements negotiated worldwide since 1989. By mandate of the government of Colombia and the former FARC-EP, signatories of the final accord to end the armed conflict and build a stable and lasting peace, the Kroc Institute is responsible for monitoring its implementation. Yesterday, one of the main peace accords negotiators, Sergio Jaramillo, together with Héctor Abad Faciolince and others, were injured in an explosion while visiting Ukraine within the framework of a peace initiative. Without persons like Sergio, who dedicated years to craft this most comprehensive peace accord, including the international component of verification, the Kroc Institute would not have this great honor in Colombia. We want to extend our best wishes to Sergio, his family and friends, as well as to Héctor Abad and those accompanying them, and wish them a swift recovery. And so, within the framework of this responsibility entrusted to us in the final accord, today we're launching our 7th annual report. During the next 90 minutes, we want to provide you with a panoramic look at the current state of implementation of the final agreement and share with you key data and analysis that you will find in greater detail as you read the text, which is already available on our website in Spanish. We will talk about the context of the report's period of analysis from November 2021 to November 2022, as we believe it is crucial to understanding the dynamics of implementation. We will address the findings of the international comparative analysis in this report, which is closely related to the political context the country is going through. We will turn to the Colombian case. We will show you the quantitative findings of this report, as well as the main findings. We will then delve into the cross-cutting gender and ethnic approaches and the results of our research for each point of the final agreement. And finally, we will present the opportunities that the Kroc Institute identifies to promote the implementation of the final accord. We hope that this will be useful for civil society organizations, implementation agencies, both at the national and territorial levels, as well as for the international community. This presentation will last for 1 hour. After there, we would have space for questions from the public, those that have been submitted in advance, and also you can use the chat option here in this Zoom webinar to put your questions, and we will, of course, try to answer them at the end of the session. So, without further ado, let us begin this presentation. I would like to start asking Brenda Forero if she can tell us, please, about the period of analysis of the report and about the context that we experienced last year.
Good morning, Josefina. And first, I would like to extend a warm welcome to all of those joining us here today. And yes, the report includes a section regarding the context of this year, this reporting period. And this was a year of institutional transition in the country after the elections of the Congress of the Republic and President Gustavo Petro and Vice President Francia Marquez election as well. And these circumstances reflect a new political approach, and it opens like a new phase in which the implementation of the final accord will play a fundamental role. In addition, it is important to point out that during this new phase, the 8th year of implementation will be reached, which marks the halfway point of the foreseen term for implementation, which is 15 years. And after President Petro was inaugurated in August 2022, the bureaucratic infrastructure created to implement the Peace Accord began to adapt to new ministerial appointments and restructuring as the president brought forth his new peace agenda called Paz Total Peace. And Petro's Total Peace policy seeks to explore new dialogues and negotiations with all illegal armed groups operating within the country in order to bring a comprehensive and sustainable peace to Colombia. In addition to these new negotiations, the policy will continue implementation of the final accord. And it's important to highlight that while the Total Peace policy brings many opportunities to address how implementation of the 2016 accord can be improved, it also faces many coordination challenges to guarantee implementation does not falter within a broader peace agenda. And after President Petro's administration concludes in August 2026, there will be just only one more presidential administration to finalize implementation of the accord within the designated 15-year timeline set forth in the framework plan for implementation known as PMI. And therefore, in order to successful implementation for the 2016 accord to occur on time, careful attention must be maintained on fixing and reinvigorating stalled implementation processes so that the next presidential administration is able to finish what was promised in the peace accord. According to the Kroc Institute, there is another situation of a great concern since the country continues to face the presence and activities of illegal armed groups, along with other factors contributing to violence. And although there was a slight decrease during this reporting period in attacks against those persons who signed the final agreement, 2022 witnessed the highest number of homicides targeting human rights defenders since 2016, as reported by the Ombudsman Office. And for us, it's important to acknowledge these lives that can no longer be lived and call for an urgent action because this situation needs to stop. And lastly, another notable element of context analysis in 2022 were the allegations of misappropriation of resources involving funds designated for the implementation of the final agreement. Alleged irregularities in the allocation of resources by the Joint Body for Administration and Decision-Making, known as OCAD-PAS, reveal illicit agreements between members of Congress, national and local officials, and contracted companies responsible for executing the projects. These agreements might have involved bribery to prioritize certain projects and select specific contractors. And the investigations regarding these issues are still going on in the country.
Thank you very much, dear Brenda, for this explanation, which allows us to understand the report within this particular context that also helps us move towards the next topic. And for this, I would like to bring Alison Kilhall to the conversation. Alison, could you share with us the topic of the international comparative analysis of the 7th report, and what are the main findings of the Kroc Institute in this regard?
Of course, Josefina. So the Institute conducted a comparative analysis of the implementation process of the 34 peace agreements that are in our matrix. And one of the findings that came out of this analysis is that the consolidation of peace after the signing of an agreement is related to the way in which the implementation process attracts or alienates other armed groups in terms of reaching a solution through dialogue and negotiation. So this is very relevant for Colombia in the framework of the total peace policy, as the current government is looking to negotiate not only with the FARC-EP dissidents, but also with armed groups that have not been part of a peace process, such as the ELN. So in quantitative terms, we found that in 14 cases, armed groups remained active during the first 10 years after the signing of the agreement. This could be signatory or non-signatory groups. We also found that in 10 cases, the groups that signed the agreements returned to the conflict either in their entirety or as a faction. And 7 of these 10 cases occurred within the first 2 years of the signing of the agreement. We identified that in 11 cases, armed groups were not signatories continued to be active in the armed conflict. And according to information recorded through 2016, of the 34 agreements in our database, only 6 cases still were involved in active armed conflict, and 5 of them with non-signatory groups. So to sum all this up, it's very normal to see the continuation of armed conflict after a peace accord is signed, whether it be a continuation with signatories or other groups. But in the long term, further dialogues with signatories, factions, and other armed actors led to the termination of armed conflict in the majority of the cases that we analyzed. And so this is why successful implementation is so important, is that it can bring more armed actors to the negotiation table. And so just to give a little bit of background, in the literature review that we conducted on the implementation of peace agreements, we found 3 mechanisms or strategies that attract other armed groups to the negotiation table. The first is having normalized politics, which really just means that the signatories recognize each other as legitimate actors and manage to work together despite their differences. The second is that it must be made evident to the armed actors who are not part of the original agreement that the problems that initially prevented them from participating in the previous process are being addressed, and that their specific interests are being incorporated into the negotiation agenda. And finally, the main causes that led to the conflict must be addressed. When implementation stagnates and the root causes of conflict are not addressed, it creates an environment conducive to armed group activation or relapse. Next, please. So what does this mean for Search for Total Peace in Colombia? Based on these 3 strategies, the Institute highlights 4 lessons learned that could help strengthen current implementation processes and therefore benefit the total peace policy. The first of these lessons learned is that the effective participation of accord signatories must be guaranteed at all stages of implementation. This includes having operational and properly functioning spaces for dialogue that were established in the agreement. And one example of that is the Commission for Monitoring, Promoting, and Verifying the Implementation of the Final Agreement, which further on in the presentation I will refer to as CICIV. The reincorporation process must be implemented in a comprehensive manner. For example, consolidating the national reincorporation system and the reincorporation program would demonstrate a firm commitment to reintegrate individuals who belong to illegal armed groups. Third, the process must pay more attention to the legal security of ex-combatants. 6 years after the signing of the agreement, there are still scenarios in which it's not clear how the legal situation of many ex-combatants will be resolved, which creates a lot of uncertainty for them and does not inspire trust in other armed actors that could be looking to reintegrate. And finally, and considering that this is one of the main root causes of Colombia's armed conflict, land access should be promoted in the reintegration process, as this would work to remedy one of the main causes of the conflict and contribute to the sustainability of the reincorporation process.
Alison, thank you so much for your precise comments. Without a doubt, this comparative section now in the 7th report demonstrates that boosting the implementation of the 2016 Peace Accord not only has an impact on transforming those structural causes of the armed conflict, but also implementation is a very important tool to contribute to the success of the present and the future peace negotiations in the country. To that extent, it is appropriate to share with our audience now how the implementation of the Colombian Final Agreement is progressing. I would like to invite Ángela Ramírez to shed light on what the Kroc Institute found for this period, please. Angelita.
Of course, Josefina. The first thing that I would like to do is to share with our audience a little bit about our methodology. I think most of the people that are connected already know how we do things, but I still think that for those cases, for those people that are just getting to know our work, and even for those that already know it, it's good to do a brief review. So the first thing I would like to say is that the Kroc Institute follows and monitors 578 stipulations. Those stipulations are actually commitments that are written in the Peace Accord Our team does the monitor of these commitments every month. They gather information from different sources, they triangulate this information, and then we do an exercise that we call codified. So basically, for you guys to know what codified means, is we normally put a number or a tag to one of those commitments, where we say if this commitment has already initiated, or is at a minimum level, at an intermediate level, or at a complete level. One thing that is important to point out is that for us to understand that a commitment is at a minimum level, we have to have seen that an action has been undertaken, and that therefore we can consider that the commitment has already started being implemented. For us to consider that is at a minimum level, again, is that it has already started, but we don't have enough evidence to feel that that commitment is going to be able to be complied within the time frame period, 15 years time frame period to be implemented. Then for us to decide or to move a commitment to the intermediate level is actually because we do have enough evidence to foresee that that commitment is going to be complied if it continues with that same pace. And finally, we can say that a commitment has been completed once it's fully implemented. The first thing that you can see in this graph is how the implementation has progressed since December of 2016 through November of 2022. The first thing that I would like to point out is that the numbers show, as of November of 2022, that 13% of the commitments had not initiated. 37% of those commitments are at a minimum level, 20% are at an intermediate level, and 31% are complete. So basically, and taking into account what I just explained on how we decide when a commitment moves from one stage to the other, what we could say right now is that the biggest challenge that the implementation has right now is to actually be able to move that 50% of commitments that are either at a not initiated or at a minimum level, especially to the intermediate level. So as you can see, 50% of the commitments at this moment we don't have enough evidence to foresee that those commitments are going to be able to be complied within the 15-year period that was established for complying with the peace agreement. The second thing that we like to point out with this graph is how the variation of implementation has changed over the years. So you can see how at the beginning of the implementation, we had bigger variations or greater variations from December of 2016 to November of 2018. You see that the curve is a little bit higher while it starts to flatten out through the years. The numbers that we're presenting in this specific report show that as of December of 2016, we had only 83 commitments that were either in progress, that means that were at a medium or intermediate level, or had already been completed, while by 2018, November of 2018, we had 410 commitments that were also in progress, again, at a medium or intermediate level, or had already been completed. That means that the variation was of 57%. Since 2010, as I said, that variation has started to decrease. And in the last years, we have found that the variation is only of 4 and 16.6 point percentage, and in the last year of 1 point percentage. In the next slide, we can see how the different points of the agreement, of the accord, of the peace accord, behave in the implementation. For you guys to understand very quickly, the graph you're going to see in lighter colors, a column with the numbers as of November of 2021, and with the darker colors, how the numbers were by November of 2022. We've been seeing different trends on how the different points of the agreement behave. The first one that we should point out is that point 3 of the agreement regarding the end of conflict and point 6 of the agreement regarding the implementation and verification are those that have the highest numbers of commitments being at a better stage, either being completed or an intermediate level. However, this year we noticed that those very same points of the agreement were the ones that had less variations of the implementation levels. And specifically, I would also like to point out that even though point 6 had variations on the levels of implementation, we could also see that those 13 commitments that regard the ethnic chapter did not had any change during the study period of 2022. I know Alison is going to get a little bit more into that later on. The second trend that we see are those in point 4 of the agreement regarding the use of illicit crops, and point 5 of the agreement regarding victims. Again, these two points behave in a way that is comparable to the general implementation. So you can see that almost half of the commitments are either a complete and intermediate level, while the other half are at a minimum and not initiated level. These 2 points, however, behave a little bit different in the last year. We can see that point 4 had very few changes. We're also going to get a little bit more into that when we start explaining each point of the agreement. But we saw that point 5 was actually one of the points that had the biggest changes during the last year, and especially that was because of the launch of the Truth Commission's report that we had last year. And lastly, we have those 2 points of the agreements that are the most lagging behind, that are point 1 of the agreement and point 2 of the agreement. One regarding the rural reform, and the second one regarding political reform. As you can see, most of the dispositions are still not initiated or at a minimum level. These 2 points had the biggest changes during the last year, but we really like to emphasize that even though they were points with the greatest variations during 2022, they are still the points that are the most lagging behind. As you can see, point 1 has 66% of its commitments still at a minimum level, and therefore, until now, we cannot affirm that they might be complied within the time frame period. And especially, I would also like to emphasize that some of those commitments are supposed to be complied by 2026. And also, if we take a look at point 2 of the agreement, we can see how a third of the commitments have not yet initiated, and 41% are still at a minimum level. And this, without a doubt, requires additional efforts from all of the implementing agencies to comply with what has been agreed. Otherwise, we do not see how these points are going to be implemented in the expected time. I think I would leave it at that, Josefina, for this question. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Angelita. We know at this point that especially important for implementation agencies is to take a step forward and take many of those commitments that are at a minimum stage and move them into an intermediate stage of implementation, because this is the only way to guarantee their viability to be, finished in time according to the framework plan. Now, Brenda, may I ask you, what are the main findings of the report?
Sure, Josefina. So the 6th year of implementing the final accord was marked by minimal fluctuations or variations in the level of implementation, as Angela was explaining to us. And despite having the necessary foundations in place, the overall viability of the majority of commitment has yet to be fully achieved. The creation of regulatory, institutional, and planning infrastructure can be considered foundational achievement in the implementation of the agreement. However, despite these essential structures being in place, there are ongoing challenges in effectively carrying out the mandates outlined in the agreement. The infrastructure serves as a framework for implementation, but further efforts are needed to ensure that the mandates are fully realized and translated into tangible actions and outcomes. Nevertheless, there were significant milestones reached during this period. One of such milestones was the delivery of the final report by the Truth Commission, as also Angela was mentioning, providing crucial insights into truth and non-repetition in Colombia. And also, like the Kroc Institute have said before, had highlighted before, like the importance of the citizen ownership of this truth to start a dialogue regarding what happened to us, why it happened to us, and what do we do as a society to stop that from happening again. And also, additionally, the formulation of the basis for the National Development Plan served as a vital step forward in advancing the goals of the Accord as well. Again, the Kroc Institute have studied the new National Development Plan, trying to determine whether or not it will contribute to the implementation or to the goals set for in the agreement. Additionally to what I just have mentioned, the ongoing political and governmental transition play a crucial role in this process as well. In this process, a careful evaluation and adjustment of various plans, programs, and forums associated within the final accord was conducted. And this adaptability needs to ensure that the accord could respond effectively to the evolving needs and circumstances during this transformative period. Overall, while progress was made and important achievements were realized, it is clear that further efforts and continued dedication are required to fully realize the vision and objectives of the final accord. And I will say that the journey towards lasting peace and reconciliation continues in Colombia, guided by the lessons learned and the determination to overcome the challenges that lie ahead. And these findings I have presented are just a glimpse of the rich insights contained within the report. So I invite everyone here today, as well as everyone interested, to delve deep into the report and explore its context in a greater detail.
Thank you very much, Brenda. Yes, we're also going to include the link directly to the report in Spanish, but also to the policy brief in English here in the chat, so everyone can access it right away and or after this presentation and read in detail. And I would like us now to start addressing the specificities of the final agreement, and starting with the status of implementation of the cross-cutting approaches. So I wonder if I may ask Alison, yes, thank you, if you could please give us an overview of what the main messages of the report are in relation to gender and ethnic cross-cutting approaches, please.
Of course. So in the case of the gender and ethnic approaches from 2022 to 2023, the gaps between the implementation of the cross-cutting approaches and general implementation remained. I'm sorry, I mean, for the period that was under this review, but they continue on. In both cases, the largest gaps were evident in the commitments in minimum implementation status and those in the completed implementation status. As we can see in the graphs, when we look at the commitments that have not been initiated and those that are at a minimum level of implementation, which, as Angela mentioned earlier, this means that they're not yet in a viable stage, 74% of the commitments with an ethnic focus and 70% of the commitments with a gender focus fall into these categories. We view this as a cause for concern and recognize the urgent need to take action in order to advance implementation in both of the approaches. When looking at the case of the ethnic approach, few quantitative changes in implementation were recorded during this period. Those that were recorded are associated with 0.5 regarding victims of the armed conflict. And so one change was related to the publication of the Truth Commission's final report and the inclusion of the ethnic chapter. I would like just to highlight that today is the year anniversary of the publication of the Truth Commission's report. And so we're very happy about that. But the integral inclusion of the approach throughout the whole process was evident, not only in the inclusion of an ethnic chapter, but also in the Commission's participatory methodologies and its presence in the territories. Another change that was related to the ethnic approach has to do with the Special Jurisdiction for Peace, the HEP, and the opening of case 09 on crimes that were not eligible for amnesty committed against ethnic peoples and territories, which recognizes the differential effects that the conflict had on populations. Concerning spaces for participation and consultation with ethnic peoples, such as the national space for prior consultation for Afro-Colombian peoples, the permanent dialogue group for indigenous peoples, and the special consultation mechanisms within the framework of the development programs with a territorial focus. These spaces were operational, however, they were not effective in promoting significant changes in the implementation levels of commitments with an ethnic approach. And finally, a positive development and a continued opportunity that we want to highlight is international accompaniment, particularly by the governments of the United States of America and of Mexico, which are the first countries to provide this type of support to the ethnic chapter. And regarding the implementation of the gender approach by point, those that show the greatest challenges are point 2, which has the highest percentage of gender commitments that have not been initiated, and point 1, which has the highest number of gender commitments in total, but lacks comprehensive or adequate incorporation. And to give an example of what we mean by this, when we look at national plans, we see different scenarios. And so one scenario is that these plans do not incorporate a gender perspective at all. Another scenario is that they incorporate it, but there's really no evidence of concrete strategies or differential actions that would guarantee the execution of a gender approach. And in the third case, we can see that there are goals related to a gender approach, but they're very limited in terms of actually being able to close gender inequality gaps and advance in implementation. So to illustrate this last point, if we look at the land access component of the final accord, the formalization plan has a goal of allocating 3% of the total number of hectares awarded to women and 8% of the total number of hectares formalized to women. This concerns us not only because this is a very low goal, or they're very low goals, but also because this agreement is very clear that land access for women should be given special attention. And these percentages of 3% and 8% aimed at campesina women do not really reflect that special attention. Also, these goals do not include women from other ethnic groups, as they're considered under the goals related to collective land access. So in this regard, there are concerns about how land access can actually be guaranteed for ethnic women in the framework of collective adjudication and formalization. As for the rest of the points with the gender perspective, as in point 1, there is a lack of coordinated and robust strategies and protocols with a gender focus. In most cases, the gender approach is more of a statement or a definition and is not accompanied by a clear measurable indicators or resources for its implementation. And to close on this point, on resources, it is worth noting that for 2 consecutive years, only 3% of the national budget that is designated for Peace Accord implementation has been allocated to fulfilling gender approach commitments. And this resource allocation is quite disproportionate considering that gender commitments constitute 22% of the stipulations in the final accord.
Thank you very much, Alison. Those are quite concerning observations. I would like us to move forward to each of the points of the final accord. And Brenda, may I ask you to come back and shed light on what happened during 2022 in relation to implementation of point 1 on comprehensive rural reform and point 2 on political participation.
Of course, Josefina, I have to say that I'll try to summarize like the deep and complex analysis that the report includes regarding these points. And And I'll start with point one. You can see right now the slide that will show you the quantitative state or status of the implementation of this point. So as of November 2022, 13% of commitments have not yet initiated implementation. 66% were at a minimum level, 17% were at an intermediate level, and 4% were complete. And regarding the components that are included in this point, the first one regarding to access to land, the report found a significant delay in the adjudication and assignment of land, with only 1% of the total amount of 3 million hectares adjudicated. Moreover, the land registry is under executing its resources and service provision and requires increased oversight to ensure that the implementation is more effective. Likewise, the report points out that the implementation of the multipurpose cadastry has experienced an under-execution of resources and weaknesses in the provision of the service that needs greater monitor and control. Also, regarding the campesino reserve zones, the report states that they have not had the necessary support but have acquired a new relevance within the Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development of the current government. And moving to the other of the components of this point, the national plans. Regarding the national plans for the comprehensive rural reform, the report mentions the approval or 4 sectoral plans in the period observed, and notes that even though they have had delays and general approach must be strengthened, these plans are a fundamental basis for planning and establishing goals and indicators to reduce the gaps between the rural areas in Colombia and the city, as stipulated in the final agreement. In particular, these national plans focus on the right to food, technical assistance, and access to land. And with this, there is still one national plan that is still missing of approval, which is the plan regarding to public health, rural health. And also, point one made progress through the prioritization of 13,458 PEDET initiatives, which total about 41% of the initiatives decided by communities. However, there are still concerns about the effective participation of local communities in the entire PEDET project cycle. Evidence shows that there is a low ownership of the PEDET projects by local communities due to the disjointed management within spaces for territorial participations, as well as in the processes of planning and resource allocation. And now I'll move into point 2 of the agreement. So now you are again watching a slide which shows you like the quantitative status of the implementation of point 2 as of November 2022. As you can see, 27% of commitments had not yet initiated implementation, 41% were at a minimum level, 18% were at an intermediate level, and 14% were complete. An increase of 4 percentage points occurred due to newly implemented commitments, like the election of the first 16 congressional seats for victims' representatives, known as SETEP, and the adoption of the public policy for reconciliation, coexistence, and non-stigmatization. It is also important to mention that the members of the special transitory peace voting districts took a proactive step by forming the Peace Caucus, a collective effort with Congress to promote and advance peace-building initiatives. And this organization, among them, serve as a platform, or could serve as a platform for SETEP members to advocate for the interests and concerns of their respective territories and communities affected by the armed conflict. However, during the electoral campaigns, SETEP candidates encountered various challenges that hindered their progress and full participation in the political process. These challenges included problems with financing and limited access to media platforms. Additionally, the lack of adequate security conditions posed a significant obstacle for SETEP candidates during their campaign activities. the persistent threats and risk faced by candidates in certain territories affected their ability to freely engage with the electorate and carry out their campaign activities in a safe and secure environment. Moreover, while efforts were made to ensure gender equality in the composition of the candidate list, there is a need to go beyond mere representation and, in most of the cases, no presentation at all, and incorporate a gender approach that address the specific needs, challenges, and perspectives of women in the political sphere. And this is of a great importance since there is an opportunity to correct or to fix these mistakes for the next step elections that will be held in 2026. Furthermore, there has been progress in the implementation of point 2 on political participation, as the national government also adopted the public policy on citizen participation. This policy represents a step forward in fostering greater citizen engagement and involvement in decision-making processes. However, it is important to note that there are limitations in the incorporation of the gender perspective within this policy. So I will conclude by saying that there is much more coordination needed among the many actors, because implementing point 2 commitments require, and also point 1 commitments requires multi-year processes with sustaining workflows, since over a quarter, especially in point 2, over a quarter of the commitments of this point of the agreement have not even initiated implementation. So there is an urgent need to take action and accelerate point 2 implementation and point 1 implementation in order to overcome stagnation.
Hey, Brenda, is all right. So thank you so much, Brenda, for your analysis of point 1 and point 2 of the agreement. I would like us to take a look at the further 2 points that we have in the final accord. May I ask Angela to join us once again and help us follow up on this account with a synthesis. We know that in the report we have many more details, but just something short that allows us to know what are the main findings about the commitments related to point 3, about the end of the conflict, and point 4 in relation to solution to the problems of illicit drugs. Thank you.
Of course, Josefina. Well, as we noted in the quantitative findings, point 3 is one of those points with the highest levels of implementation. However, it is also one of those that reported the least progress during the study period. In the report, we draw special attention into main topics that we consider very fundamental. So the first one would be reincorporation, socioeconomic reincorporation, and the second one, security and protection guarantees. Regarding the economic reincorporation, the report calls or emphasizes that it should be comprehensive, articulated, and harmonized. And this implies that on the one hand, the reincorporation must respond to the needs of the signatories, but also that the process must be sustainable. It means that the actions are not only should not only respond to a formal exercise, but actually be aimed to change the lives of people that have initiated this type of process. Therefore, what we really point out that it is very important to formalize the national reincorporation system and consolidate the comprehensive reincorporation program as a roadmap. In the report, we also point out how 80% of the people in the reincorporation process are beneficiaries of productive projects, whether they're individual or collective. And although we believe this represents, of course, a progress, we also see a great challenge to maintain the sustainability of these projects. The report also states that both the access to land and housing are very important to maintain or guarantee the sustainability of this process. Now, regarding the security and protection guarantees, we would like to focus in some particular issues. First of all, I don't want to miss the opportunity, as Brenda already pointed out, to underline that in 2022 was the year that it registered the greatest violence against social leaders, and it was already presented, and that the violence is already or still present in a lot of territories in Colombia. That is why the report shows the need and the relevance to articulate the implementation of the final accord with the total peace policy of President Petro. Brenda has already talked a little bit about this. And to this extent, the first thing that we like to point out is that it's very important to activate the high-level forum of the Comprehensive Security System to Exercise Politics, the CSEP, since this forum is in charge of coordinating the different programs, and is also in charge of providing the guidelines regarding security and protection guarantees. And finally, in relation to landmine removal, we would like to highlight the constant work of this tripartite mechanism to remove mines throughout 2022 in all of the territories by the information that was given by the signatories of the agreement. Now, regarding point 4, as you can see in the graph, the numbers show that point 4, as November of 2022, we had 3% of the commitments that had not initiated implementation, 47% were at a minimum level, 27 were at an intermediate level, and 23% were complete. Point 4 continues to show a lack of progress in the commitments regarding the comprehensive national program for the substitution of crops of illicit use, also known as PENIS, with a high concentration of commitments lingering at a minimum level of implementation. The first thing that we really highlighted in the report was the concern that arises from the monitoring that done by UNODC regarding the increase of hectares of crops used for illicit purposes. This increase was of 43% last year, as well as the increase of these crops in areas of environmental interest. Likewise, it also showed, we also pointed out that by the end of 2022, the immediate action plan for the 99,000 families that are part of PENIS had not yet been completed. And maybe I should point out a little bit more of what that action plan means. It actually means it's the component of the PENIS that aims to assist the families enrolled in the program once they have removed coca crops, providing them necessary support such as food and technical assistance. So although 80% of the families have received food assistance payments, there is still a lack of implementation. And this lag is significantly greater if we take a look at the component of the long-term livelihood projects of PENIS, because by the end of 2022, only 2% of the families had been beneficiaries of this component. And finally, regarding point 4, and also considering the integrality of the Peace Accord, we emphasize in the report on the importance of articulating all of the PENIS components with those of the national plans for comprehensive rural reform that Brenda just explained.
All right, Angelita, thank you so much for this overview, the synthesis of what is happening with point 3 and point 4 of the agreement. I would like to invite Alison to join us again and help us shed light on what are the main findings that we have in relation to the status of implementation of point 5 on victims and point 6 on implementation, verification, and endorsement mechanisms, please. Thank you.
Okay, so as we can see in the graph, during this period of review, point 5 on victims maintained a steady pace of implementation. In the truth component, the changes in the level of implementation refer mainly to the end of the Truth Commission's mandate, particularly the publication of its final report and the installation of the committee for follow-up on its recommendations. We conducted an analysis of the report's recommendations and found that 58%, or 135 of the 232 recommendations have a direct or indirect relationship with the commitments that we monitor. So a key message out of this analysis is that the implementation of the Commission's recommendations would substantially contribute to the implementation of the final agreement. As for the unit for the search of persons deemed as missing, we highlight its architecture, particularly in the unit's inclusion of the cross-cutting approaches. They not only created groups with gender and ethnic focuses, but also included both approaches in the search processes themselves. As for the justice component, we highlight the issuance of 3 resolutions by the HEP, 2 for case 003, which is on extrajudicial killings presented as casualties of war by agents of the state, and 1 for case 001 on the taking of hostages by the FARC-EP. So this process has been very important because it is the first time that those most responsible for these acts have accepted responsibility in judicial spaces, and we anticipate that the first sanctions will soon follow. Additionally, in July of last year, the HEP reported the opening of case 011 on sexual violence, reproductive violence, and other crimes committed in the armed conflict. And although this is positive, as it reflects the demands that the victims of these acts and that civil society organizations have been making, so far this case has not been formally opened. And finally, for point 5 in the reparation component, we want to highlight the delay in the completion of the comprehensive collective reparation plans. We note with concern that of the 866 plans, only 54 have been completed, and of those 54 completed plans, only 2 correspond to ethnic subjects, despite the fact that they represent the majority of those who qualify for collective reparation. In the case of point 6 on mechanisms for the implementation and verification of the final agreement, we can see in the graph that there were no quantitative changes in implementation levels during this period of analysis. What we observed was that some of the commitments related to the operation of the CICIV are lagging behind. For example, CICIV is in charge of conducting an annual review of the framework plan for implementation, those PMI indicators, in conjunction with the special high-level forum with ethnic peoples and the special women's forum. However, the parameters have not been agreed upon, nor have joint territorial sessions of the CICIV been held. So although no quantitative changes were observed in this period, there were also no setbacks, and we would like to kind of highlight some positive qualitative changes that stood out to us. The first is that the integrated information system for post-conflict remains a useful tool, and there's evidence that it is increasingly reporting information from the territorial level. In terms of resources for implementation, last year there was substantial increase in the resources allocated by OCADPAS, amounting to almost 4.5 billion Colombian pesos, which is about $1 billion, as well as, but however, as mentioned earlier, there have been reports of possible misappropriation of these resources. So that's something to keep in mind, but we would also really like to highlight the international accompaniment, which has been constant and sustained and really been decisive for the implementation of the agreement. And finally, for point 6, taking into this year's local elections into consideration, it is of utmost importance to achieve coordination between the territorial development plans and the PMI indicators in order to promote and ensure the implementation of the accord at the territorial level. That's all for point 6.
Thank you so much, Alison. I think that we've already looked, at the context. We've looked at the gender and ethnic approaches at each of the different points of the agreement. And I think that the only thing that we're still in need of covering for this initial presentation would be the opportunities that we highlight at the very end of the report. So, Angelita, could you please tell us about those recommendations that we formulate and identify for the main stakeholders? So we had one of those questions already from the public, for our main stakeholders, for the decision makers that are engaged in the process of implementation. Thank you.
Of course, Josefina. The first thing that I would like to point out, and again, as Brenda just did, I think it is important for you to know that our report has opportunities in each chapter of the report. So for each of the points of the agreement, as well as for the ethnic and the gender approach, you will find specific opportunities. The ones that we're going to mention here are only those general opportunities that in a certain way we have also been presenting during this webinar. So the first opportunity that we like to point out, and it's something that Alison just mentioned, we find that it's very important for the Commission for monitoring, promoting, and verifying the implementation of the final accord, the CCV, to establish the parameters of the annual review of the PMI. As you know, this is a commitment that is supposed to happen annually. Until now, it hasn't happened. This framework plan is it's where all of the commitments are established, where the government sees the indicators and set goals. So it is very important for that review to be done. And one thing that we also point out here in this opportunity, it is that it is very important for the gender and the gender and the ethnic special forms to be part of this review that should be done of the framework plan. The second opportunity that we like to point out, or that we pointed out in our report, it calls upon the Office of the High Commissioner for Peace and the unit of the implementation of the final agreement to define an action plan that enables the activation of and coordination of the implementation agencies and programs in order to contribute to the objective of the total peace policy. Again, as it was mentioned during the context and during the explanation of point 3 of the agreement, a lot of negotiations are being undertaken now with different armed groups. And basically what we're saying here is that it is very important for the government to take into account those forms that have been already created by the peace agreement of 2016 and articulate them with with the total peace policy that is being undertaken by the government right now. The third opportunity that we're pointing out in the report, especially for the Ministry of the Interior, the National Planning Department, the High Commissioner Office for Peace, and the unit for the implementation of the final accord, is to establish a strategy that will enable the territorial the people that are going to be elected. And maybe I should go back for a little. For those of you that don't know, although I think we have already mentioned it during this presentation, by October of this year, of 2023, there are going to be local elections all over Colombia. So this opportunity is especially calling upon the Ministry of the Interior and the other agencies that I just mentioned to create a plan so the candidates that actually are going to be elected include in their plans, programs, and projects mechanisms to implement the peace accord. The fourth opportunity that we show here is actually in the same sense, only that is for the territorial authorities that are actually going to be elected, to get to know the accord, get to know the commitments that they have to comply with, and actually incorporate them in their plans and programs and projects. The next opportunity that we present in this report is for the Colombian Congress and the government of Colombia. Again, just to define and promote a legislative agenda to implement all of those pending commitments of the peace accord. And maybe here I should mention that throughout the report, you're also going to find some charts that show those pending normative or legislative issues that need either of a decree or a normative or a law to actually be implemented. So actually right here, we're just telling the government and the Congress of Colombia to sit down, review those commitments that are still lagging behind or that are still pending, and just create an agenda regarding those issues. Especially, we make a special emphasis on those issues that are still pending regarding political participation, because as we just mentioned, point 2 of the agreement is one of those that is the most lagging behind. And finally, we highlight an opportunity for the international community just to continue with their support. As Alison was just mentioning, we've noticed that the support of the international community has been key for the implementation of the Peace Accord. So here we just highlight this opportunity for them to continue with the political and financial support of the Peace Accord implementation, and specifically to the gender and ethnic approach. And that is it.
Thank you so much, Angela, Brenda, and Alison, for your presentations. Now that we are a little bit over 60 minutes, I would like us to begin this new section of questions and answers, which is going to last another 20 to 30 minutes until we are at past. But first, I would like to tell you that it is extremely important for us to know what is your opinion, your perceptions about the Kroc Institute's work in Colombia. And so we invite you to fill out a brief survey that you will find in the chat to help us continue improving and strengthening our work. Now, in relation to this Q&A, we would like to extend our thanks to all those who sent us questions prior to the launch, and as well as the question that we had before, and we encourage everyone who's still joining us to include your questions in the Q&A session of the Zoom. I think that we can hopefully address all of the questions that we have received, and I would like to read them just the way that we have received them, either online or in the formularies that you filled in at the beginning or here. So let me start with what I have here in front of my screen. Do you think the peace agreement implemented in Colombia can be replicated in another country? Maybe if I may ask my panelists, all of you, to turn on your cameras, and I will start then with Alison, if you can help us with this first question. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So in general terms, absolutely. We can replicate this in other countries. Of course, the particular commitments must be adjusted to the context of each case. But what should be replicated is the comprehensiveness of the Colombian agreement, which is reflected in the inclusion of cross-cutting gender and ethnic approaches, the centrality of victims' rights to truth, justice, reparation, and guarantees of non-repetition, and in the commitments related to socioeconomic reforms, such as the development programs with a territorial focus and the national program for the substitution of crops used for illicit purposes, which seek to address the root causes of the conflict. So again, these comprehensive programs and approaches are desirable for other peace agreements. Another aspect of the Colombian agreement that is also worth highlighting is the role played by international accompaniment, which of course Kroc plays a role in. Currently, we are working in the Philippines, where together with Catholic Relief Services, we are developing a continuous monitoring model based on the Colombian experience, so trying to replicate it there for the implementation of the 2014 Bangsamoro Agreement.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Alison. That's really, I think, very much to the point. And of course, we're very happy to have received that invitation in the Philippines. I have another question here. What are the recommendations for civil society to support the implementation of the peace agreement? And what are the advances and setbacks in terms of access to public information related to implementation of the agreement? Brenda, would you like to take that question yourself, please?
Sure, Josefina. So of course, like civil society support to implementation, like peace implementation processes is of a great importance. And I think that's something that is important to answer both parts of that question, is that taking ownership of the monitoring tools, design it to track the commitments stemming from the final agreement is crucial. There are so many tools that are working right now that fulfill this task, such as the Integrated Information System for Peace Building, known as CIPO, the Central PDET, which is the Central System for Territorial Development Plans, the Investment Map, and the Land Observatory as well, among others tools that have been created to monitor and track the implementation of the peace process. And these tools are vital for assessing the progress and impact of differential approaches as well, and the allocation of financial resources into the implementation. Another idea that I have is that public resources, particularly those allocated for peace building efforts, play a critical role in ensuring dignified living conditions, especially in many regions of the country. So misappropriation of these resources not only violates the legal system and the mandates of the final agreement, but also has a profound impact on the human rights of vulnerable communities residing in rural areas deeply affected by the armed conflict. So addressing this issue is essential for breaking the cycle of violence and achieving lasting peace. In this part of my answer, I will highlight the necessary transformation that the Accord aims is necessary and active and vigilant civil society. Like, it's crucial. And my last thought regarding this question is that the agreement offers the necessary guidelines to pursue this goal. To promote citizen oversight and participation in the implementation process. Specifically, point 2 on political participation outlines various measures, including a comprehensive plan to enhance citizen oversight and control, as well as mechanisms to foster transparency within political and electoral engagement. So I'll pass the word to you, Josefina, to see if we might have other questions.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. I'm going to read one that we received some minutes ago. What is the completion level of the 578 stipulations as corresponds to the party responsible for their implementation? Let me look around and see if maybe Alison or Angela want to answer that question.
I can do it, Josefina. So the first thing that we should say is that the level of implementation depends on all the actors involved in the process. Therefore, the responsibility cannot be divided. However, it should also be pointed out that since it's the most comprehensive accord, as we have mentioned in this webinar, and due to the range of the social stipulations that were actually included in the peace accord just to respond to those root causes of violence, the implementation of those mechanisms or the implementation of those policies, of course, are mainly in the response. The state authorities are mainly responsible for them. However, if we also take a look from the FARC perspective, as a signatory of the accord, their responsibilities were specifically associated with the disarmament and the ceasefire of hostilities, which were concluded at an early stage of the implementation. And we also have some other commitments that, of course, they have some type of responsibility there, that is to contribute to the truth-seeking and the victims' reparation, which are still ongoing and, of course, have not yet been completed.
Thank you, Angelita. Yes, I think that it's quite important to see this also as an enterprise that involves such a great investment in terms of times and energy of course, especially implementation agencies, but also international community and all of us, no? Also as civil society. We have another one here. How is the implementation of the gender and women's rights approach going? Alison, you were responding some of these already earlier in the seminar, but is there something maybe that you would like to add? Thank you.
Yes, so we recently published a special report on gender in April. So I will highlight some conclusions from the comprehensive report, but also from the special report on gender, which I would encourage all of you to look at as well, because it is very thorough with this specific theme in mind. So just to reiterate a little bit of what I mentioned in the comprehensive explanation, but basically gender mainstreaming in general is lacking. There's not really plans or projects that incorporate an integral comprehensive gender approach. When they do mention it, it's very textual, and it doesn't identify concrete mechanisms or create them for that execution. Something else that we found and that we kind of have seen in these graphs today is that there are low levels of implementation for gender commitments, and this slow pace of implementation for these commitments that address women's concerns and LGBTQI plus persons' concerns only increases as the implementation process advances. So there's always been a gap, but over the years that gap is widening. So that's something that's very concerning for us. And just lastly, to mention the persistence of obstacles in the participation of women and LGBTQI plus persons in different political and social spaces derived from the final agreement. Those are some of the issues that we're seeing currently.
Yes, thank you very much, Ali. Yes, it's an important call of attention and a call to action about the cross-cutting approaches. If I may read the next question, what is happening with the framework plan for implementation in Spanish, the PMI indicators that do not have a technical sheet yet, nor progress, and will the unit for implementation rethink them? Brenda, may I ask you to shed some light on that? Thank you.
Yeah, of course, Josefina. So first, we have an entire section regarding the PMI in our comprehensive report. But to answer this specific question, we conclude an analysis of the general reporting of PMI indicators, and what we found is that 3%, 20 out of 554 of the indicators in the SIPO system still do not have a technical sheet uploaded or approved. This means that no qualitative or quantitative progress is reported on these commitments. Specifically, point 1 is the point of the final agreement with the most indicators with technical sheets pending to be entered, 8 sheets. These indicators refer to commitments in the area of social development in health. Most of these commitments should have been initiated between 2017 and 2018. The CCB, in coordination with the special forums in charge of establishing the parameters of the annual review of this PMI framework, have a fundamental role in this, to answer this question. And as of the cutoff day of this report, the parties have not agreed on actions in this regard within their operational agenda. So as part of the CCB, it is important that the implementation unit promotes this issue urgently in its agenda. So I'll leave it like that.
Okay, Brandy, thank you so much. I have another question here about the National Development Plan 2022-2026. And it says, specifically in relation to the solution to the problem of illicit drugs with an ethnic approach, the national plan mentions a decree. Do you have any further information? Angelita, maybe you can help us with that more legal question. Thank you.
Yes, in fact, the ethnic approach of the National Comprehensive Program for the Substitution of Crops Used for Illicit Purposes, also known as PERNIS, has a pending task since the creation of the program. And although the framework plan for implementation, the PMI, has established that a decree should define the ethnic root for this program, the decision of the previous government was not to have a decree, but rather some guidelines for this ethnic route. As the closing of the report, those guidelines had not yet been agreed with the ethnic organizations. And even though the Article 11 of the National Development Plan of 2022-2026 does establish that the national government will develop the necessary mechanisms to comply with the commitments acquired with the ethnic communities, and this article is supposed to move forward a new program proposed by the new government. The truth is that neither the guidelines of this new program nor the budget allocations for the ethnic communities are known until now. So basically, we cannot give this person further information because it is not public yet.
Okay, perfect. All right. We hope to learn more about it very soon. There's a question in the chat that relates a little bit more to another context of peace accord implementation, is the Balkans. Considering the cultural, socioeconomic, and political differences between Colombia and the Balkans, to what extent do you believe the lessons from the Colombian peace process can be applied in the Balkan context? So I think that in general, what we have seen in the Peace Accords Matrix research, but also in our practice, is that, of course, the context cannot be compared. Of course, the different types of conflict have a direct influence in the way that the peace process is set up and the peace accord is being designed, as much as the peace accord implementation program or plan. But what we can very well understand, we can get better at, we can learn insights, we can share insights, is about the processes and the topics. So one of the things that you will find on our website on peaceaccords.nd.edu are, for example, policy briefs, where we look at the way in which we have, for example, put victims at the center of the negotiations, not only in Colombia, but in many other peace accords. And that has created a very important dynamic. It changes the way that the conflict is perceived and is negotiated and is spoken about by the conflict parties, but it also changes the way that the energy of the implementation process is channeled or directed at. So, for example, putting the victims at the center is incredibly important in any different context. Another one, there is a very interesting policy brief that we have authored with former President Juan Manuel Santos. And one of the other lessons that we find there is having the international community accompany not only the peace process, but also making sure that in the peace accord design, you have an international component of verification and you have international accompaniment for implementing, for politically supporting, for financially supporting the implementation of certain aspects. We have seen in the Colombian case that there is a direct link between the international accompaniment and highest rates of implementation for certain points. So I think that, as Alison was saying before, the fact, for example, now that we have the United States and Mexico accompanying the implementation of the ethnic approach, for us is very important. We believe that this is going to help us push implementation further. So as you can see with these two examples, while we have very different contexts, what we know is that policymakers, conflict parties, facilitators, and mediators in different conflict resolution contexts around the world tend to be concerned, tend to face very similar questions. And this is why we believe that there are certain lessons that, while we cannot copy and just put them there without any adaptability to the circumstances or the actors, of course, there is an important, we can say, bulk of knowledge about peace building and peace accord implementation that I think we can rely on for other contexts. But of course, this is what we're also hoping to learn more as we accompany the process of implementation in Colombia. And as we heard with the case of the Philippines, we're also able to share lessons learned south to south, which is, of course, very important from the perspective of the epistemologies of peace. Let me find here another question. Thank you so much for that question. what do we need as mechanisms and incentives to keep the ball rolling despite potential decline of interest in support? Alison, may I ask you to take that question, please?
Sure. And a lot of it has to do just with your example of international accompaniment. So I'm going to kind of go back to a few points that we've really mentioned throughout the presentation today. But on one hand, it's very important to make use of the architecture created by the agreement to support its implementation. So mechanisms like the CCV and things that are already in place really have to be operational and properly functioning, and that would really help. I mean, that's what they were made for, was to help the implementation. So to really get those up and running the way they should be is a huge step. Also, again, what Josefina just touched on, it's really, according to our analysis, it's very effective. These mechanisms are much more effective when we have impartial third parties or members that are outside of the conflict. And that's, again, why this international cooperation is so important and has been key to the implementation of Colombia's final accord. So again, United States and Mexico with the ethnic approach, all the different levels of support have been very key and will remain that way throughout Colombia's implementation process. And another crucial factor to maintain this momentum has to do with the local elections that I know Angela has also mentioned, and its link with the PEMI indicators. But again, this articulation of the developmental plans at the local level with these PMI indicators would really help promote and guarantee implementation at the local level. And although there's evidence of this inclusion of different elements of the accord in previous plans, particularly with the PEDET and the PNIS programs, the lack of coordination has really led to low execution because we don't have those indicators. So again, a little bit of all that we've talked about today.
Thank you, Alison, very much. I have another question that precisely echoes some of the comparative sections in our 7th report, and it reads like this. Based on the implementation of the agreement with FARC-EP, what are the lessons learned for Petro's total peace policy? Brenda, I think we talked about it a little bit at the beginning. Would you like to highlight some of those aspects now?
Yes, Josefina. So yeah, as you said, the report answers this question in a greater depth, as well as the previous presentation of the comparative analysis can serve as a basis for this answer. But what I have to say is like the final accord in Colombia established a profound socioeconomic reforms that, if fully implemented, might contribute to some of the demands presented by armed groups participating in the total peace dialogues and negotiations. And the Kroc Institute considers that through the following lines of actions, the implementation of the final accord could promote and attract the armed actors to a successful negotiations if there. First, guarantees for the effective participation of the accord signatories to participate in all spaces of the implementation and to ensure the full proper functioning of accord dialogue spaces like CCV, for example. Also ensure that the reincorporation process will be fully implemented. It's another line of action. Guarantee comprehensive access to land. It's also an important action to have in mind. And also guarantee legal security for ex-combatants in the reincorporation process is something that it's of a great importance in these dialogues that the government is trying to establish with all legal armed groups in Colombia. So yeah, I'll pass the word to you again to see if we still have time to answer more questions.
Gracias. Thank you, Brandis. Yes, I think we might have time for a last question. And I have this one that is very interesting about data use. So it reads like this. How is your data use and does it have any impact on implementation? maybe the executive director of the Barometer Initiative can help us shed some light on that. Angelita.
Yes, of course. I mean, of course, we hope not only our data, but all of the information that we provide, our analysis, are used by all of the key stakeholders of implementation here in Colombia. We have seen how this information is used in different forums and different spaces. So I'll mention just a few of them. Recently, we have been invited by the Constitutional Court of Colombia, that is like the Supreme Court here, that studies issues related to the Constitution, to the compliance of the Constitution of Colombia. And they have called us to participate, not only presenting documents, but also in hearings regarding the Peace Accord implementation topics. So for instance, when they were studying if the mandate of the Truth Commission should be extended or not, we provided a document where we showed how this wasn't rare in other parts of the world, in other peace accords that had been signed previously, and how even that it wasn't rare, but that the first time that it would actually be extended because of a something external of the Truth Commission, such as the pandemic, would be in Colombia. So actually, the Constitutional Court read our document, and part of the arguments presented there were also used to extend the mandate of the Truth Commission. The Constitutional Court also asked us for information to see how the security guarantees and protection for ex-combatants were being undertaken, and if the government was actually complying with those mechanisms, and taking into account the information that we gave on how the implementation was doing, specifically on point 3 of the agreement, the Constitutional Court decided to declare that in Colombia, the human rights of the ex-combatants and social leaders weren't being complied, and therefore declare several actions that the government actually has to undertake in order to comply with those commitments. It also called us for information regarding the 16 seats, special seats for victims in the Congress, and how the elections, the past elections actually worked, and what can be actually done for the following elections to be improved. We also have been presenting our reports in the before the Congress of Colombia. They have different political debates and also public hearings where they like to see how the implementation is doing. And of course, this is to mention actors that you wouldn't think that are actually part of the implementation of the Peace Accord, but that have actually been very important to move forward, to push very political actors that send important messages to the government to comply with the Peace Accord. But of course, we also work along hand with all of the implementing agencies and give them information, technical advice. We work also with the special forum, the Gender Special Forum, and other agencies in Colombia to review what we have been talking about, the PMI indicators, just to see where the goals are, what can be adjusted, and just try to give them impartial information on how to improve the implementation of the Peace Accord. So these are, of course, a few examples, but I think it can show how the work that we're doing is making an impact on how the implementation is being implemented. Sorry.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. And thank you to each and every one of our panelists, Angela, Brenda, and Alison, for all your input during the past 90 minutes. I would like to thank our audience for joining this webinar, and reiterate to those who have not done that yet to please fill out the perception survey, that hopefully you're also going to find the link there in the chat very soon. As director of the Peace Accords Matrix, I would like to state that the Kroc Institute will always be willing to support and accompany Colombians in the worthy but difficult task of building peace. In this spirit, today we're joining the celebration of the first anniversary of the final report to the Truth Commission. We are the hosts of the Transmedia Files and are committed to keeping the legacy of the Commission alive and active, engaging with the memories created by more than 27,000 testimonies, and guaranteeing its online access in perpetuity. I also take this opportunity to thank the Barometer Initiative team, who are now present in so many regions of Colombia, as well as the researchers and staff in the United States. The results of these projects are only possible because of dedication and commitment with which they carry out their tasks, and I am honored to lead a team that so strongly believes in Colombia's peace and works for it every day. Finally, many thanks to all people who joined us today at this launching event, and to the organizations that have also followed, accompanied, and engaged with us in the development of our mandate over the last few years. I hope you all have a good afternoon. Thank you so much.